start a brand new week by looking back at the top stories of the week that was. And to help us make sense of what those stories mean and why we should be paying attention to them is our resident analyst, Mighty Jamie. Good morning, Mighty. Did you have a good weekend?
Morning, Peter. I did. I hope you had one too.
I did actually. I was in Tanzania watching the Thabo Mbeki lecture.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I enjoyed Tanzania, but I was saddened that we're busy talking about the state of the continent and how important it is to have a new order, no, governments that are supporting the people. And guess what? They blocked Twitter. Ugh.
So I saw some of the coverage of the event that was going on in Tanzania, and my concern was that it's happening in a period of repression in Tanzania where opposition leaders have been arrested. And obviously you can't raise those issues when you're a guest, under those conditions. But I was concerned that we are almost talking cross purposes. Amicler Cabral, everybody likes to quote him, and he said, claim no easy victories, tell no lies. So in fact, part of the problem we have is these dictatorial regimes that appropriate the rhetoric of Pan-Africanism while they themselves are now part of the problem that young Africans are facing and dealing with. It's not just neo-colonialism they're dealing with, it's intra-colonialism where these leaders are taking power and keeping it for themselves. And the CCM is one of the parties, I think, that is just not doing well in that respect.
Talking about young people, there were two young people who did what was called a student response. And one of them was actually, in fact, both of them were quite profound. But one guy said, listen, this Agenda 2063 is outrageous because it's too far away. We need urgent, radical transformation now. And he says that, and the problem with 2063 is that those that are responsible won't be there to account for their failure. So I thought that was interesting. But anyway, let's focus on what's happened. It was a big week in many areas, and sanctions on Sudan. The United States has announced sanctions on this country following findings that the Sudanese government used chemical weapons during its conflict with the Rapid Support Forces in 2024. What's your take on this?
Well, it looks to me like the United States of America is now getting involved in the first instance, because I think this is the first salvo of the Trump administration. I think they feel very confident after having made a deal between the DRC and Rwanda, and perhaps now they are looking at tackling the issue of what's happening in Sudan. And their calculus is a bit odd to me because they are not necessarily going after the Rapid Support Forces. They are going after the Sudanese armed forces, which I thought, okay, this is a bit weird, but maybe that's the party that is proving to be difficult to get to the negotiating table. So at a geopolitical level, at a diplomatic level, it seems as if the Americans now have put this on their table, so to speak, and are trying to find some version of a deal that can be made. And I look at this as a coercive tactic. Having said that, the issue and the principle itself is that if indeed the army has violated, the Chemical Weapons Convention, that's something that is unacceptable, regardless of who they are fighting and regardless of their standing in the war. The other thing that just I have to note and keep, harping on is that regardless of whether the army makes a deal with the Rapid Support Forces, this is not what the people of Sudan wanted. They went to the street to protest against dictatorship. They went to the streets to protest for a constitutional democracy, not a military regime a la Egypt, a la what we're seeing now in Tunisia. That's not what they went to the streets for. And I think we have to remember that there was a movement of civilians, a movement where people were placing their lives on the line to actually resist what had been a 30-year period of oppression, Peter. But it looks to me that the Americans are moving, and, they may find favorable ground. It looks as if, in his own way, Donald Trump is able to make strange deals that do actually placate all of the different parties and get them to some modicum of normalcy.
We wait to see how that plays out. West Africa, Nigeria's ruling All Progressive Congress has endorsed President Bola Tinubu to run for a second term in the 2027 elections. Now, I'm curious about this. I mean, this early endorsement, what do you make of that? And he's not a young man.
He's not a young man. There were a lot of rivals the last time. And I think that may actually affect his prospects going into the election, because I don't think that he'll be successful a third, or I mean, this strategy will succeed for a second time, rather. He's not a young man, 73 years old. This early announcement seems to me to be a page out of Trump's playbook, which is to consolidate your position in the party, make it very difficult for rivals to be able to try to challenge you within the party, and then for everyone to fall in line. So it may very well be that everyone will fall in line, or maybe there'll be some challenges internally, to this kind of a decision. Sometimes when politicians make these type of moves, it seems as if it's a foregone conclusion until something else happens. But if they go down this line, I think that they'll see stronger names coming through this time around who are frustrated. We had Atiku the last time, and we had the young man also contesting, whose name is just run from my head. But I think they may see that this time around it may not actually work. The conditions on the ground in Nigeria continue to deteriorate. People are extremely unhappy, and I don't think that this will lead to a positive outcome for them, Peter. I just, having listened to, I was hosting somebody from Nigeria like last week, and what they were describing is something that I think many Nigerians are really frustrated with in Lagos, in Abuja, many parts of the country. It's a crisis that people have been living with and bearing, but I don't know if this kind of a move is something that will get a good reception this time around.
Donald Trump, this famous meeting that took place, President Ramaphosa and his entourage and Donald Trump, where he produced this evidence of white genocide in South Africa. Well, South Africa says, look, this is just not true. This is misinformation. And look, the CIA is one of the top intelligence agencies in the world. They are definitely CIA agents in South Africa, which means Donald Trump knows for sure that there is no genocide taking place. Why is he doing this?
Well, Donald Trump has a difficult relationship with the intelligence operatives. I actually just saw yesterday that they were saying that he doesn't actually get the daily briefings from the intelligence community because he views those as a form of trying to manipulate him. We also know that he doesn't have a positive relationship with the news media, and he keeps saying, you guys won't cover this, you guys won't talk about this. We know that he does consume Fox News, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, all of these various podcasters that are part of his news feed, news stream, and we know that he consumes a lot of right-wing social media content. So it may very well be that he has a genuine belief that the version that he's been given by Elon Musk, by Peter Thiel, and the people around him is an accurate version. And of course, if we assume that he does know that it's not true and that he is pushing that narrative for his own political purposes, then the reason why he would be doing that now, one, is to show the MAGA base that he is somebody who is a defender of white people around the world in the first instance. And if he does know that it's not true and pushes through with that narrative regardless, then he is using it as leverage to be able to get America favorable geopolitical and diplomatic and financial positions, which is part of what he does anyway. In the book Out of the Deal, they speak about how Donald Trump will try to take this hard position to coerce a negotiator to something that is favorable to him. And it may seem that he's not interested in necessarily the ethics of all of that, but the outcomes of all of that. And if the reports that we are seeing are accurate, that now they are changing the ICT sector codes in a way that will make it easy for Elon Musk to be able to bring Starlink into South Africa, then that's something that I think shows that he is getting the outcomes that he desired. So that particular meeting in the White House is still, I think, leaving lots of people scratching their heads around a variety of things that happened there, because some of the golfers did reinforce the narrative that Mr. Trump was also speaking about. But if we're very objective, just deal with the information that he presented and that he had. Number one, we cannot use the rhetoric of one politician as evidence of killings of people. You would need to actually show court cases. You would need to show a connection, a causal connection between the political rhetoric and the actions. I mean, if we think about what happened in Rwanda, for instance, we know know for certain that the rhetoric on radio did lead to the genocide in Rwanda. So the logical gaps that exist in the narrative that Trump has been pushing and part of perpetuating are quite stark. Even the fact that you went to a memorial and it had crosses on it is not, necessarily evidence that those particular people who died have been killed as a result of politically motivated crimes, and particularly politically motivated farm murder with a desire to capture those farms. And we know the person whose family was involved in setting up the memorial said that the two people who committed the crimes that killed his family members actually are still in prison to this particular point. So Trump's argument that they take the farms and nothing happens is not particularly true. About EFF supporters occupying land in some other, disputes that have played out, but that had nothing to do with farms, and that had nothing to do with the broader issues. So it's a very complicated thing. I think they should have been better prepared for the props that Trump used, and maybe even to have brought some South African farmers or something to that effect to go into the White House. Trump is very open to props and using props. Remember when there was an accusation of him having sexually molested and harassed somebody, he brought, not Hillary, but Bill Clinton's accusers to one of the debates that he was having with Hillary Clinton, if you recall that. So he's been quite known for using props, and I'm not particularly sure that everybody had fully anticipated what he would do and prepared for it, which was perplexing to me, because the team that went there had multiple billionaires, and various billionaires were working behind the scenes. So the strategic planning, I think, needed to have been much better than what we witnessed. But in and of itself, we know that the narrative is true. It looks as if it was to secure Elon Musk some positive deals. And if it was for that, I think that there has to be some strong reticence and resistance in South Africa, because if Elon Musk led the American president to cancel US aid, cancel PEPFAR, create a fake refugee status for the Afrikaners, only for him to be able to get Starlink, to reward him with Starlink in South Africa, to me seems grossly unethical.
Okay, just there's so much to try and fit in, but do you know what? I know. I actually want us to look ahead a little bit, because the African Development Bank is having its annual meetings this week, and one of the things that's going to be decided upon is the successor to Adesina. And there's a woman in the mix this time, South African, Swazi Shabalala. Do you think after 60 years the African Development Bank is ready for a female president, or is it going to be much the same?
Peter, I'd love to see what she's proposing to do differently, because access to funding has been notoriously difficult for startups, for venture capital. One of the reasons why we don't see companies like Elon Musk's company Starlink or OpenAI, Sam Altman, is not because we don't have brilliant, talented Africans, is because we don't have funding for them. So many computer science graduates, so many engineering graduates, they're all forced to go to America to try to pursue a better life, no funding available. So on the one hand, the issue of gender for me is something that I always put a question mark around, because I've just recently now seen somebody become president of Tanzania who is as repressive as any other gentleman to have ever occupied African presidency. So I do have this reticence when the gender ideology is pushed without the, linked progressive ideas, because if she is a woman, that is great, and it is progressive for the bank to have a leadership which is of women, because women can do anything men can do, but they can also oppress like men can do. They can also be corrupt like men can do, because that equality does not extend to virtue, it can also extend to vice. So I'll be curious to see what she's actually proposing, and if that translates to real access to funding for young entrepreneurs, for small businesses, and not the same old that we've been seeing over the last 20 years, which has led to very little development, but a lot of rhetoric and a lot of big salaries for people all around Africa who work in these type of financial spaces, Peter.
All right. Mighty Jamie, we're going to have to leave it there. Always great talking to you. Have an awesome week ahead.
You too, Peter. Let's see what happens with the bank.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating for sure. All right, that's one of our regular commentators on issues across the continent, Mighty Jamie, unpacking some of the big stories of the week that was. It's time for your news headlines, and today in the news desk is Jualani Tulo Mwepe.
SABC